Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Lentini, and I'm the host for the podcast Different Thinking for Different Times. And this is season 6, episode 2. What I'd like to ask everyone in the community that has been watching these podcasts or listening to them for the past 6 years, which is now, by the way, in 31 countries. It might only be one person that listened in some of those countries. And I'm grateful that people are getting the message. That's why I do the work. I'm not worried about revenue from the podcast because there hasn't been any. I take that back. I think $27 in 6 years. I do it because this is something that came to me through synchronicity, or as Deepak Chopra calls, it's my synchro destiny. I'm going to tell you a quick story of how it came to me, and it might be something that you pay attention to. And again, you got to prove this to yourself. Whatever I'm suggesting, never follow anyone or anything blindly. I've written about that in my book. You can see it behind me. You might be full of shit if. And what I can tell you is that I was sitting with someone who had a lot of jobs and was really anxious, and anxiety, as it turned out, was really impacting their life to the point where it felt like a nightmare. And it caused me, this person's description of their life caused me to flash back to my own nightmares as a child, which took a force of will to wake up from. In fact, sometimes I found myself outside of my bedroom when I woke up, or others woke me up gently as they guided me back to my room. And it takes a force of will to wake oneself up in one's lifetime. In fact, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff said that. He said his full quote is that most men live in a bourgeoisie sleeping man's state, and that it takes a force of will to wake oneself up in one's lifetime. So while I was sitting with this person who was describing their life that seemed like a nightmare, I said, do you mind if I just write something down? And I wrote down, it takes a force of will to wake oneself up in one's lifetime, thinking of the force it took for me to wake up during these nightmares as a child. A week later, I'm at a tag sale in the town I lived in, and I see a book for 50 cents at a tag sale, The Possible Psychology of the Evolution of Man by P.D. Ouspensky. I took it home. I started to read it. I said, I guess this isn't for me. A week later, I'm reading something by a spiritual writer. It might have been David Rohr or David R. Hawkins, but Richard Rohr or David R. Hawkins, I forget. But I'm reading it, and this person, this is the first time I heard the Gurdjieff quote, or I read it, that most men are in a bourgeoisie sleeping man state, and that it takes a force of will to wake oneself up in one's lifetime. And I thought, I wrote that last half. Who is this George Ivanovich Gurdjieff? At that time, I lived in Salem, Mass. I went to the library, and still it was a card system. It was not yet computerized, and there was nothing by Gurdjieff or about Gurdjieff in the card library. So I asked one of the librarians, I said, are there reference books for philosophers? And the librarian said, yes. I just want to shut off my phone so we don't hear the obnoxious dings and reminders. And so anyway, long story short, there's nothing in the library about Gurdjieff or by Gurdjieff. And I go up to the section where the librarian directed me. She said, yeah, there are reference volumes. Go upstairs, take a left at the top of the staircase, first aisle on the right. Sure enough, there were 4 sets of volumes of philosophers, and something told me pick the green-bound set. I pulled out the green-bound set where the Gurdjieff, the G would have been, and a book falls on the floor that had been stuffed in between there. And I thought for a moment, I got the goosebumps. I said to myself, if that's about Gurdjieff or by Gurdjieff, I'll say it. I'll just shit. Anyway, I resisted the urge to pick up the book off the floor. I opened up the green volume, did not find anything about Gurdjieff, put the book back, bent over, picked up the book on the floor, and it was by a student. Wrote about the work of Gurdjieff, but it had no mention of it in the title. And of course, the author's name was different. It was one of Gurdjieff's students. And when I opened the book, it said that this was about his experience in some of the Gurdjieff workshops. As I, of course, checked the book out, but as I'm standing there, I read that one of his students was P.D. Ouspensky, who wrote the book, The Possible Psychology of the Evolution of Man. I thought, well, I got that book too. That's strange. It just seemed like, what were the odds of that book being stuffed there and me being guided to that exact spot to find Gurdjieff, who was not in the catalog for the library? Now, this was the year 2001. Flashed forward, I had a student in my classes in the year 2001. I was a licensee for a sales training, a national sales training program. And I was talking about the universe. I talked about Gurdjieff. I talked about what I was learning, that we live in a miracle. And we forget that there are powers that we can enhance, kind of like magic or mystical or even mythical, because we live in a universe, something we truly don't understand, even to this day. And so one of my students said, you have to meet this lady. It was now 2002 in June. She said, you have to meet this lady that I attend her workshops once a month. And she says a lot of the things that you say. Now, she didn't say anything more than that. And I said, I'm glad to go. So I went to the meeting with this woman who was in my work. And I meet her coach, one of her coaches. And we have our pleasantries. There's a meet and greet. There were probably 15 people there. And this teacher sits down when the meeting starts and said, I want to share something here. Pass these articles out. I want to share something written by George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. Now I hear it again. And at that time, as the licensee of this work, I knew it would never be my own work. And part of me wanted to do my own work. In fact, I would have flashes of riding on a train, sitting by the window on a train, and a train would pass me by on the opposing track, and I'd see myself sitting on that train. And they were both night dreams or daydreams. It would just come into my consciousness. I was on the wrong track, and I was listening to this acorn brain tell me, you'll never have your own work. You got to stay with this license. Who will listen to your own work? Who will buy your own work? So long story short, that's how I started my own work, because after that June meeting in 2002, November 13th, I was doing one of those sales training classes 1 second, and the next second, I needed an ambulance. I felt like I had been knifed or shot in the abdomen, but I knew I needed an ambulance, and I told my assistant to take over the group and went and waited for an ambulance. I asked my office to call. And I can tell you, I was grateful waiting for the ambulance. I've shared that story because it was like a sense of a divine presence, a universal presence. Now, I'm reflecting back on that today in the moment. I was just grateful. I didn't realize what I was doing then was surrendering to what showed up. I was grateful in the experience, even though I didn't know how my body was doing. I never had the thought that I might die, although I could tell by the look on people's faces they feared that. The EMTs certainly were concerned, and very concerned when they asked me how I was doing, and I said, I don't know how my body's doing, and I'm grateful. They thought for sure this guy needs an ER doctor and a shrink. Now, 5 days later, I flatlined, and I got the experience of the other side. What's next, I call it. That we become part of the infinite forever. At least that's what I learned. And then there were many other surprises, according to this little acorn brain, but especially that the divine, there was only the now. And I had not really lived much in the now. I did, but not like I do today. And I am embarrassed to say I was 50 before learning to totally surrender to the now, to enjoy each moment every day. I only have today. I don't have to worry about tomorrow. And so that's what I do today. It's part of my process. In the book, How to Train Your Mind, written by a dragon that I wrote this year, I talk about how to train the mind. And I start my days with, this is a fantastic day. And then I intend for more synchronicities, 2 or more every day. And they often occur. And it has me remembering that we do live in a miracle and that there is an invisible force, whether you call it God or the divine or the quantum field or the goddess, the universe, the Abraham, the Brahma, the Buddha, the Muhammad, the Christ. They're all rooted in Abrahamic traditions, branches of the same tree, which is funny, considering how people fight over their slight differences. But I can tell you that's not the purpose of this podcast. What I wanted to share with you is that there are synchronicities in your life that are giving you clues to your destiny, your synchro destiny, as Deepak Chopra talks about in his audiobook. It's on Audible, in fact, if you want to listen to it. And what I can tell you about synchronicity is they come more often when you intend that you'll have more synchronicities, and you start to recognize that statistically, what happened to me, for example, finding Gurdjieff in that library, stuffed between the reference books, the odds were like winning the lottery or probably even more remote. And when you think about those occurrences in your life, that statistically they would not happen, and perhaps even if someone could statistically give you the odds, they'd be 1 in billions or trillions, right? Almost infinite odds that they would not occur statistically. And then, in of course, my darkest moment, that life had to whack me with a 2x4 to wake me up to what was possible for me and overcome this little brain telling me I could never write books, I could never have my own work, I could never enroll people in classes. And here it is, 22 years later, I'm doing my own work. I gave up that license and paid attention to what life brought me. Everything works together for good, Christ was purported to have said. Mohammed was purported to have said, what reaches you was never meant to miss you, and what misses you was never meant to reach you. So that reminds me today to be with what shows up and know that there's a gift in it, that life is happening for me, and that in the time of my challenge, I woke up finally to what my synchro destiny was. And it's funny that I got clues, the nightmares, the force of will it took to wake up. And so that took from being a child to early teenage years, when I overcame my nightmares by learning how to jump into them. Lucid dreaming, it's called. And that was synchronicities because I got home early one day from school and either Merv Griffin or Mike Douglas had someone on. My next guest is going to talk about how to conquer your nightmares. It's called lucid dreaming. And there was commercial, and boy, I was tied to that television set and learned how to lucid dream, to jump into my dreams, and realized what was chasing me in those dreams was fear. And it did take a force of will to wake up. And once I did jump into those dreams, they disappeared. That's the same thing we need to do in our lives. And then flash forward, life was giving me clues that Gurdjieff and waking up was some part of my work and overcoming what Gurdjieff called the machine. Now, I read the work of Gurdjieff and found more works by Gurdjieff, read about his theory about the machine running us. Will you let the machine run you, or will you run it? And then realized I could read the P.D. Ouspensky book that I had bought at that tag sale. It made sense to me. And Ouspensky talked about the same thing, that there's levels of consciousness. Gurdjieff used to say, in fact, it's as if we live in a mansion and we only occupy the first floor. Imagine that. And so I didn't pay attention to those little synchronicities that were giving me clues. And then life gave me the biggest gift by whacking me with a 2x4 and knocked me from the train that was on the wrong track and put me on the right track. So my work is about helping people reprogram their mind. In fact, here's I have a series of books. So here are the books. They're on Amazon. You can go to stevelentinauthor.com, my new website, where all my works are on there and how to get them. But here's the No BS coaching book, Wake Up from the BS You Tell Yourself. I suggest this first if it's something you want to do. You want to start waking up. Instead of having a grievance or a complaint about your life, it's happening for you. It's a big gift when we can finally shift from the track of complaint and grievances and making others wrong. There's so much of that today that even our leaders model. So it's very difficult for people to really wake up to their synchro destiny, to what they're supposed to be doing in this life. And then I wrote How to Train Your Mind, written by a dragon. Program Your Mind for Success. And the reason it's written by a dragon is I'm a dragon in Chinese mythology. And so I lay out first, wake up from the BS stories you tell yourself, because when you're in a grievance and a complaint about anything or anyone, your job, your spouse, your family, your children, your neighbors, the store, when you're in a grievance or complaint about anything or anyone, you're delaying your good. You're the one delaying your good. And then How to Train Your Mind, I talk about how to reprogram this mind so it works for you. And the gift in that voice, by the way, that has you believing you're less than anyone or superior to others, or worrying about the good opinion or bad opinion of others, or afraid in times of challenge, that voice is urging you to run it. Rainer Maria Rilke called it the little hooligan. Deepak Chopra calls that voice the petty tyrant. I call it the acorn brain. And I have another name for it. If you've ever watched the movie The Fockers, I call it the little Focker, if you know what I mean. We have to be ruthless with our ego and stop wanting to be right, and ruthless with that little brain, the acorn brain, that wants us to be stuck in a complaint or victim thinking. Worse, that life is happening to me. You want to hear what happened to me today on the job? Our job is to learn how to bring our complaints to someone who can do something about it, meaning instead of talking or gossiping about someone, go to them. Or on the job, instead of having a complaint, bring a suggestion. A complaint with a request, I call it. But you begin to discover your power. Doesn't mean people will do everything you say. it begins a dialogue where you negotiate. You may not get your way. You may get part of your way. You may get accolades for, hey, thanks for bringing that up and suggesting this. And we can do part of that. And here's what else we can do. Thank you. But if you live in your mind, if you live in the story, the grievance, the complaints, you're delaying your good. Now, I want to avoid life hitting you with a 2x4. Although if everyone had a near-death experience, we wouldn't be so petty. I wish everyone could experience it, just not before this podcast ends. I wish everyone a long life and the ability to wake up to what life is guiding you to, that life is happening for you. Wake up every day and say, this is a fantastic day. It's the only day you have because you're here. You might not complete the day because one second I was fine on November 13th. The next second I needed an ambulance, and I did complete 5 more days until I flatlined in intensive care. I don't want you to take my word for anything. Prove it to yourself. Start paying attention to the little synchronicities that you recognize. They're guiding you. The other day I was listening to Deepak again, and he mentioned most people miss what's in plain sight and fail to embrace life as it is. That was a book I finished last year that just got published in December, In Plain Sight. Learn to see what most people miss and embrace life as it is. It was like, wow. Another message that's the work that I'm supposed to be doing. Now, I know that, and it's also good to have a reminder because this little brain likes to take me down the path of having a complaint or a grievance or the victim, woe is me. Now, when I did have my near-death experience, there were a couple parts of it. The third part was a question I was asked. Stay or go. And my consciousness surrendered with thy will be done. That was November 18th, 2002. Again, listening to the Deepak book, all of a sudden he's talking about the Vedic traditions. And he said, in the Vedic tradition, the most powerful prayer you can have is thy will be done. So again, what do you think I thought? Wow, another little synchronicity for me, life guiding me, continuing to show me that we live in a miracle, something magical, something mythical. But we get bound into this life, paying bills and meeting our obligations and then complaining about what shows up, the people that show up, the events that show up. I urge you to consider, experiment with it, let go of grievances, and whatever shows up, be with it fully. When you're with everything that shows up in your life fully, you become everything you are meant to be. But you got to experiment with that. And that's what I do with my coaching clients. That's the work I do. Now you can go to stevelentiniauthor.com. All of my books have free gifts of coaching if you want a free coaching. And I don't sell anybody coaching. They decide if they want to jump in, and many just take the free coaching. And that's fine. That's what I do. It's what I'm here to do. If you'd like to help me, then share this with someone. Share the podcast. I don't have a subscription to the podcast. Share it. Share it with people that you think, hey, there's something I think you could listen to and get something from, especially if you hear people gossiping, talking about others, giving you a tale of woe about what happened to them today. What happened? You want to hear what happened to me today? It's a tale of woe. It's not serving you. It's a grievance. You're delaying your own good. Don't take my word for it. If you have questions, I'm here. Steve@stevelentini.com. Here, I'll show you how to spell it. It's on my book. Steve@Steve Lentini. You see how to spell my name? Just add Steve at stevelentini.com. I'm glad to help. You can reach out anytime. If you'd like to be a guest, I've had many more guests these last few years. If you'd like to be a guest, I like to talk about helping people expand from small-minded thinking into limitless thinking, shift into limitless thinking that models what we live in, a magical universe, a mythical universe, a miracle. You can call it the quantum field, the God, the goddess, the divine, the Muhammad, the Christ. It doesn't matter what you call it, the Brahma, the Buddha. Just if you have a belief in something higher than you so that you can work on crushing your ego. That's what I had to do, is become ruthless with my ego, which is edging God out. Wayne Dyer used to say that a lot. But that's up to you. Make your life a magical experiment. Wake up every day and say, this is a fantastic day, and I'm intending 2 or more synchronicities to remind me that I live in something magical, miraculous. Right? Here we are floating on a little ball that scientists and physicists say is probably the size of a grain of sand in relation to the size of the universe. Just imagine that. Watch for synchronicities. Take your life to the magical and the mythical. Find your synchrodestiny. And hopefully, long before life has to wake you up by hitting you with a 2x4, like it did me. I wish you all the best. And feel free to reach out to me if you'd like. And please share it.